Budget moves from being a bill, which is now before the joint session of the National Assembly that was presented, by the President to both chambers of the National Assembly, that's the Senate and the House of Reps in a joint session. When it is passed, it becomes an act, and 49.76 trillion naira, which is the biggest in naira terms, but not the biggest in dollar terms due to the devaluation, will now become a spending limit. That means it is now mandatory for the government to spend this as much as they raise the revenue. They were seeing deficits of 13 trillion. But this is what the assumptions are of this particular budget. So that is the budget size, as you know on your screen. We're familiar with that, but let's stay here for a moment. These are the basic estimates or assumptions, as it's called in economics. The budget side, besides the GDP growth rate, the expected crude oil price, which is quite volatile, and the government is confident that over 2 million barrels per day of crude should be what they should be aspiring to get. Inflation number, which is the most controversial and debatable, as well as the exchange rate, which people say the government is just reflecting the market. But this is what they are looking at the end of the day. But let's look at what they looked at in 2024, coming in 2024, and what the performance of these key indicators or key assumptions are. If we could get to the 2024 budget assumptions, if my producer can get that before I get in, my guests were already standing by in our Abuja studio to break it down for us on the 2024 and 2025 budget. So, yes. In just a moment, I want to show you the 2024 budget assumption, as well as the performance so far, if my producer can get that. So, because this is how we look at performance in the broad term. The government says we will do this. So look at this slide. 2024 budget, when we're coming in, the government says we aspire to grow the economy by 3.76. We stand now in the third quarter at 3.46. Crude oil production, we want to do 1.76, but they are doing slightly less than 1.5. That is minus condensate. If you add condensate, they can say 1.8. The exchange rate, that went, it went crazy, if you will, allow me to use that word. So 750 was the assumption. We are now roving around 150, 140, and all of that. Crude oil price, that is not within their control, 78, but now we're doing 72, 73, 74, depending on the mood. And then inflation number of the target, from 21.4% that they aspired, it's now 34.6. So if we look at this screen, by all the indicators, they missed it all of it. But there are things behind these numbers. So let's bring in our guests who will further break it down for us as to what we'll be looking at as far as the 2025 budget is concerned. Mr. Muda Yusuf joins us from Abuja today. He's the CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Public Enterprises, as well as Paul Alaje, Chief Economist and Partner at SPM Professional. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Dr. Yusuf, let me start from you. Your quick highlight because I had to pull out those numbers of the 2024 assumption as to the performance we have now. We're going to be rolling some numbers as well, from GDP to FX to production year on, from last year to this year as we go on the program. But when you heard the president make his presentation, and this I call it politically, using the word ambitious is great, because it's really an ambitious budget. What was your impression of this particular budget presentation and what the president had on offer?
Well, thank you very much for having me, or for having us. Well, my impression was generally very positive. The messaging by the president was positive. The delivery was also okay. And when we look at the priorities that the president set out in his speech, I think those priorities also reflect the desires of the citizens generally, given the prevailing economic and social conditions. The priorities were defense and security, infrastructure, health, education. I think these are critical things, actually, that are bothering both the citizens, the corporates, and even the hindering economic performance generally. Because if you take security, for instance, security has a whole lot of implications for the economy, particularly from the point of view of productivity of agriculture, and from the point of view of the impact of that on agro-allied industries. So it's a very critical issue. Then infrastructure is critical, health. No, that is not to say that other sectors are not critical, but these are very critical issues which the president has, rightly prioritized in the budget. And he also highlighted some positive expectations, which I'm hoping that if you have the right kind of policy support, it will be good for the economy. He talked about, reducing fuel importation. I think that will be great. We can support that with the right kind of fiscal policy so that we don't see a situation where we are producing petroleum products possibly to meet local demands, and we have the capacity to do that. And on the other hand, we are still importing. So the president is highlighting that as part of the expectations for 2025. That, for me, is a very positive thing to hear. Then the president also talked about, possibility of even exporting refined petroleum products, which is also good. That means that if you can get it right, particularly with the oil and gas sector downstream, will have a lot of positive implications, for the economy. He talked about expectations around inflows of foreign exchange, and we are beginning to see some signs. In terms of the forex outlook, the foreign reserves, getting to over $40 billion. We are seeing some stability in the exchange rates over the last 4 or 5 months. We are seeing some relative stability. We are seeing some improvement in terms of inflows from the IMTOs. So a lot of positive outlook, generally. He also talked about expectations from improvement in agriculture on the back of the likely improvement in security. So if you look at all of this, I think it is pointing in the right direction. You talked about the assumptions. Of course, there are a few of the assumptions that doesn't look or that look too optimistic. Particularly, just as you said, the assumption around inflation. I mean, if currently we are doing 34% and we are talking about going to 15%, of course, that is really very ambitious. In terms of GDP, I think that is attainable. Oil price, maybe that is also a bit on the positive side, on the optimistic side. Given the outlook generally, especially with the Trump presidency, the outlook is not as bright in terms of oil price as has been projected. The output too, 2.06, we have been struggling to come near this level, but we have not been able to do that. Maybe it's going to be aspirational so that you can push those in charge to ensure that they move close to this target. So let me stop there. These are some of my initial response, to and impressions on the budget presentation.
To you, Mr. Alaje, and your own impression as well. So the understanding when it comes to budget presentation, if this was a company, it feels like I'm coming to you, you gave me the position to manage our Commonwealth, and I am coming to you to give me some more money or some money to manage our fiscal year 2025. But I want to show you what I did with 2024. And I think I did quite well with 2024, which is why I have the impetus to ask for this much. Work with me, let's be ambitious together and push this as far as we can get. For you, how did that come to you when you saw that presentation and some of the things the president said?
Yeah, thank you so very much. For me, I saw the good, the bad, the ugly in the budget presentation. I will start with the good. The president came with a lot of hope and enthusiasm, even though those who might have prepared the president's speech, they need to rework it next time. And I'm happy with the way he managed the issue of 11 assembly, and he carefully and jokingly balanced it, because that in itself, can turn to a political conversation. And Nigerian politician, before you know it, they turn it to headlines. But he jokingly balanced that. Two, talking about the budget itself, the president quickly made reference to some of the things he intends to do. He made, among the way he will spend his money, the second largest thing on the item for me, which I saw, was security. After that, he allotted more to infrastructure. Those are things that I think are the good, in the budget. When you look at things that are not so good, are those things that he intends to achieve, but to my mind, I think there are other things we need to reconsider. First is the issue of exchange rate. 1,500. Are we talking of today or we are talking of 2025? If it's today, that chance has been missed by 2024 presentation, which happened in 2023 when the president thought it would be 750, but many of us said, no, it will be 1,500. Record I spoke with your colleague, Mr. Shewon Kimbaloye, August 2023, and I was very clear as to what forecasting was saying, that 2024 exchange rate will average 1,500. We are here, 2024, the year of our Lord. Official market is 1,500. It has spiked to 1,900, 1,700, and thankfully we have it around 1,500. So we also look at what we may think is not exactly it. The issue of inflation. In fact, IMF recent report on Nigeria revealed that the policies of government needs to urgently be reviewed, as IMF was shocked as to why Nigeria is still progressing in high inflation. The president said he hoped inflation will come down from 34.6% to about 15%. Well, I don't think with the current policy environment, we will achieve that inflationary pressure. If government is planning, because this is the largest fiscal document, and we base our plan on inflationary pressure of 15%, then we might be missing it from the beginning. Here is what it may look like. If the current environment is maintained, we might not likely come out of 30% in 2024. An exchange rate may spike a little beyond. If we are very lucky, just a little. If we are more, we might see some level of impact on our FX. And if you ask, by January, we start seeing the impact when those who have come to dirty December are returning back to where they are from. Secondly, we might also see the impact when manufacturers put a lot of pressure in producing for Q1 or H1 for the year. And when you also see towards the third quarter, these are periods where, when people are also going for summer, these are periods where you start seeing, recall that the year after next year is pre-election year. Pre-election year, politicians are rolling their sieve, they are ironing their babariga. Why? So that they can dance. And you know, the culture in Nigeria is when they dance, we exchange hand. That most of the time, or in recent time, is not the Naira, perhaps is the hard currency. What will we do now that the president is hoping that it will be 1,500, so that it will not be what it was, what it is right now, 750, showing us 100% higher than what he projected?
Let me come to Mr. Muda. Sometimes I try to think, and it looks like the consensus among economists is this 15% inflation number is so ambitious. They also talked about market reflective 1,005. People felt like, okay, can we do better than that? But they are trying to be as optimistic as they can be. So what do you think that, from where you sit, that the government is seeing that we are not seeing? Because we know that there's a process of rebasing of the GDP and all of that will be coming through and all of that. So what exactly are they seeing that they throw these numbers at us and we keep debating this number that we're not seeing?
Well, first, these are estimates. What we have before us are just proposals from the executive. It will still go through the National Assembly. Some of these figures may eventually change. But in terms of the assumptions in particular, particularly the inflation assumption of 15%, it's very difficult to rationalize where that has actually come from. Because if we're already at 34 and we are going to 15 within 1 year, I think that's a tall order. I mean, you only need to do a historical check of the trend, and you begin to wonder how that can come about. That, of course, is too ambitious or too optimistic. But in terms of the other things, we have seen some improvement in some key fundamentals. Now, if you talk of the exchange rate, there's a major import substitution effect that is beginning to unfold with the Dangote refinery. And I keep saying that we need to provide all the support to that refinery and other domestic refineries. Because one of the biggest pressures or sources of pressure that you have on our foreign exchange, on our reserve, is the importation of petroleum products. So if we're able to take that off, and we need some fiscal policy support to make that happen. Because normally in the production environment, if you want to protect your industries, you need to deploy some tariffs. You don't leave the industries open like that. Because if you look at the tariff book, many of the industries are protected. Because the environment in which they are operating is much more challenging than the environment in which some of these imports are coming from. So I want to propose that there has to be some protection. More so when the president has alluded to the fact that part of his outlook on the positive side is that importation of petroleum products will drop significantly. And even will reverse the situation by exporting. So that also could have some positive impact on the foreign exchange outlook, which may have informed the assumption. The growth outlook, I don't think that is too controversial. We are already at 3.46. The projection here is slightly over 4%. I think that is realizable. If there are some margin of errors, I think that will be tolerable. The output, again, maybe is aspirational. There is nothing wrong in being aspirational when you are given targets to some of your agents who want to undertake. But we need to worry about how we are going to manage the fiscal side in 2024, because that is one area that we have always had challenges. And when I talk about fiscal side, I'm talking about how we can ensure that we moderate money supply, that we moderate fiscal deficit, and that we moderate the rate at which our debt exposure is growing. In this budget, for instance, in the speech that was delivered by the president, over 15 trillion, now 15.8 trillion was earmarked for debt service. That is huge. That is really huge. But by the time you add to all the critical priority areas that you highlighted earlier, altogether, they are still less than this 15 trillion. So that is one critical area that we need to watch in terms of increasing our exposure, in terms of the cost of the debt, either domestically or internationally. Because if you look at our interest rates on government bonds and treasury bills, they're actually very high. And even the Euro bond too was on the high side. So that pressure, we need to see how we manage it going forward.
All right, let me bring you, Mr. Alajo, on this one. Let's talk about how this impacts the average citizen, because at the end of all of the big economic conversation, the theoretical and the conventional things we can talk about with those who understand numbers, is about how it impacts everybody who is a citizen. So this is how citizens look at things. No matter what the president says, no matter what his economic team says, no matter what economists analyze, is their current reality versus their previous reality as against their future reality. That is their own economics. And what we are seeing is that there is a lot of move on the side of government towards optimization, not necessarily productivity, that should begin to kill cut some of the numbers we're looking at so they affect everybody down the line. What do you think the government is missing or is doing that will impact the people directly so that the price of egg can come from 250, 300 to maybe 100?
Thank you so much once again. What government needs to target these budgets to, it should be on manufacturing, everything that will support manufacturing, everything that will make service more seamless, everything that will encourage employment, everything that will encourage production, everything that will encourage boost in our agro produce. This is what a budget should be connected to. To my mind, over the years, presidents come in and go, and they perform this ritual. This budget, by the way, a lot of people in the media have said is ambitious. I don't think it's ambitious. In fact, can I be honest with you? This budget is actually, in real sense, smaller than 2024 budget. Why? There is what we call a concept of money illusion in economics. It's an illusionary effect when we think this budget is big. In dollar terms, that of last year was $36 billion, $36.7 billion. This one is $28.18 billion. Do I think it will have so much impact as we had in 2024? The answer is no, because the amount are not the same in dollar terms. And you can ask, your cost of living last year, has it not increased sporadically? Cost of awarding 1 kilometer road last year, is it the same that we will spend this year? The cost of fighting insurgents per state, will it be the same as it was next year as it is this year? The cost of transport by workers, will it be the same? That is why government has increased salary from 30,000 minimum wage to now 70,000 minimum wage. So if the overall budget in real term, we are using dollar term, assuming there is no inflation. If you make provision for inflation, then it will even be worse off. If you make provision of inflation at even 30%, then you know that we have a lot more to deal with. So how do I think this budget should have been? My advice is more macro. And when I'm speaking, I'm not speaking to the past president or the present president. I want a situation where a leader of our country, we present a national development plan, not the one that will be done by a committee, the one that will be supported by legislation. It could be 10 years, it could be 15 years, it could be 30 years. Where do we need infrastructure in Nigeria? What do we want a child that is born today? What kind of Nigeria do we want the child to see? This is what China did. This is what UAE did. How do you want the coming generation, the newborns, by the time they get to 30? How much must we spend as government? How much in investment do we need for private sector? What do we want manufacturers to produce in Nigeria? So when we make this and support it with legislation, we will now start voting funds to hit. So whether the party that wins is A, B, C, or is X, Y, Z, or is PQR, it doesn't matter. You know from the budget, certain percentage must go into this critical infrastructure. It will not stop there. Private sector will also be wooed to invest. Government know how to do this. When we have sports, we know how to woo them. And when people see, when investors around the world see that we have started investing locally, and government is sincere with consistency when it comes to voting fund into infrastructure, you will see much needed investor, because President Tinubu has really moved around the world trying to woo investors. And we can count not less than 5 countries and more that he has been to. But when they come and they go to research and they go to rating organization, some of which we don't have control over, how did they rate us? To me, I think if you want to have a good budget that will impact people we know in Arkila, in Sokoto, that by so period, certain projects will come to us. And they will know the same thing in a way that this will come to us. By that time, Nigeria will be a small city, I don't want to say village, where we know we are co-contributor and we want the country to be envious, to be envy of many others.
All right, as we begin to wind down, Dr. Yusuf, let me come to you. I want you to speak to the issue of agriculture. You and I have discussed this before. Agriculture grew by 1.2% year on year from the GDP numbers. Not impressive, even though it is the chief driver or the biggest contributor to our GDP besides telco and, of course, trade. What can the government do? Also, we have the issue of agriculture and the issue of food import levy. I don't know what has happened to that. Because the fundamental thing is that people are hungry in this country. What can they do with this budget by implementation? I think that's what everybody's shouting. It's not just good enough for the numbers. By implementation, that will really impact the people down the line.
Yes, just let me add a little to what Dr. Alaje just spoke to about what governments needs to do from the point of view of the welfare of the citizens. You know, there are also some micro-level interventions that could make a lot of impact. Just before we came into the studio, I saw something scrolling on your screen that Customs has announced a reduction, a drop in duty on cooking gas, on CNG, and all of that. So I think it would be useful to look at other critical issues that impact on welfare. And let us use these fiscal policy instruments to waive and possibly remove any form of import tax, import duty, VAT, on things that impact on welfare. I'm talking about things that relate to raw materials for industry, just as Dr. Alaje said. I'm talking about things that relate to public transportation. The cost of acquisition of vehicles now is extremely prohibitive. And part of the reason it's prohibitive, apart from the effects, is also the import duty that people are paying. And this is a country that is dependent almost 100% on road transportation. So we should find a way to bring down those costs. So those are some of the things. And coming back to the issue of agriculture, let me also emphasize here that when we talk about issues of development of the economy, a lot of the items are on the concurrent list. The resources of this country, about 50%, is with the states and the local governments. So when we are talking about these issues, we should also be asking, what are the subnationals bringing to the table? And I can understand the exclusive issues like issues of security, issues of maybe policy around forex, around monetary policy. We can begin to engage the federal on that. And issues also major infrastructure. But when you talk about agriculture, the states have a whole lot to do to complement what, in fact, they have a bigger role to play.
Absolutely.
So we should bring them into the picture, even rural economy, road transportation, education, health. What are the states bringing to the table? All of these issues are very critical in this conversation.
That's a good point, and that's a good place to land, Dr. Yusuf. Absolutely, because we've seen the fact numbers, record high, 1.7 trillion. I was even worried. Money supply, they've been complaining about it, and we're still pumping more money. And some of these governors will change it to dollars, and the numbers will go up yet again. But it's an ongoing conversation. Dr. Muda Yusuf is the CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises. My apologies. Private enterprises. Also, Dr. Paul Alaje is a chief economist and partner at SPM Professional. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insight. I appreciate you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, when we come back after this break, we'll shift gears to Edo State. There's a political development in that state. The governor wrote to the assembly, said these gentlemen that are manning the local government, they refuse to open their books to us to find out what exactly they are doing with your money. And the assembly swung to action, suspended them, and now a panel has been set up to investigate all of this. We even saw, like, the EFCC is involved in the mix. That's the conversation next, after this break. Join us again.